How long have you been doing this?
Since COVID. Good evening. Welcome to Beth Israel, the West Temple, Triscuit Road in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm so honored to have on the center stage this evening Dean Fisher from Cleveland Marshall College of Law and so much more. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you. It's an honor.
We're going to talk about your personal life a little bit and your professional life and your judicial life and your Judaic life. Let's just start with how you came to think a college choice like Oberlin would be right for you.
Well, first I will tell you that my father and my uncle both went to Oberlin College. So I knew about Oberlin even as a little boy. I was the only student in my class at Shaker High School who went to Oberlin, frankly, because no one wanted to go to college that close. And I didn't think I did either.
Huh.
But when I visited the Oberlin College campus, something resonated with me. And those 4 years that I was there, I never felt like I was 45 minutes from Cleveland. I felt like I was more like 5 states away. It's its own special culture and atmosphere, small town. I loved it. I also loved the fact that you could get to know a lot of people pretty quick because it's a fairly small college, only about 2,500, 500 in the Conservatory of Music and 2,000, 2,500 total, 500 at the Conservatory and 2,000 in the college. So by the time I graduated, I knew most of my fellow students.
And even then, I'll bet you were a very social person, a very involved person in the school.
I'm an extroverted introvert, meaning that I love being alone, but once I'm with people, I feel very comfortable. And so, yes, I was in the Student Senate, was elected as a freshman, and vice president of my class, that kind of stuff, yeah.
And so those aspirations of being in a leadership position, did that start even in your high school years?
Oh, it started before that.
Before that, tell us.
My favorite story, the beginning of my political career, goes back to 1963. And I was a 6th grader at Fernway Elementary School in Shaker Heights. And one day I came home and I said to my parents, I'm going to run for president of the school. And they said, honey, that's great. Go ahead, do it. Well, what we didn't expect was that Billy Riley, the most popular kid in the 6th grade, best looking kid, smartest kid, best athlete, every girl loved him, every boy felt they wanted to be like him, and every parent wanted their daughter to marry Billy Riley someday. And I'm going against Billy Riley. Meanwhile, my forehead was the same size then as it is now. So I was all forehead. I was sort of a nerd, right? So I come home and I say to my parents, guess what? I'm running against Billy Riley. And they said, honey, this is not a good idea. Even my parents, I lost their support. But I won the race.
Did
and
you
I'll tell you
really?
how I won the race. And it's something that I've stayed with me my entire political career. I decided that the best way to beat Billy Riley was to ask every student in the 6th grade if they would support me. Every single one I went to. Billy was sort of like the Fonz. He doesn't need to ask anybody. He's Billy Riley. He didn't ask anybody for their support. And I won in a landslide. Now, maybe it was out of sympathy. Who knows? But all I can tell you is that what it taught me is don't assume, ask for support. If you want help, ask. Don't assume it's going to come to you. And years later, when I ran for governor of Ohio, I told the story to a reporter. And he said to me, have you stayed in touch with Billy Riley? And I said, no, I have no idea where he is. Well, that reporter tracked Billy Riley down in Toledo, Ohio. He's a Republican businessman. He gets him on the phone and says, Billy, do you remember Lee Fisher? He said, oh, yeah, I remember Lee Fisher. And he didn't say it in a particularly nice way, you know. The bottom line is that he said to him, are you going to support Lee Fisher for governor? He said, no, I'm not. And so I said, give me the phone. So I said, Billy, now you're not holding a grudge all these years later. He said, there's nothing to do with that. You're a Democrat. I'm a Republican. By the end of the call, about 45 minutes later, he said he would support me.
Wow.
So that's my Billy Riley story.
But even then, you understood that hard work is the soul and the bottom to everything that gets created in real life, correct?
I am what I guess you would call an overachiever. I don't think I was ever the smartest kid in any class I was in, but I usually was the hardest worker.
And how did law school come about? How was that decision made? Maybe I think I want to be a lawyer, I'll try law school.
My father was an exceptional lawyer, and I give him all the credit for why I went to law school and became a lawyer. My father went to University of Michigan Law School. He was a law clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit.
Wow.
Then he moved and started with Ulmer Byrne. Then he formed his own law firm with a man by the name of Harrison First. Eventually he joined Gurrit, Merritt, Zog and Cohen. That firm unfortunately didn't last too long. He then went to Arter and Hatton, and in his final years he went to the East Side and practiced on the East Side. But the bottom line is my father was an exceptional lawyer. I learned a lot from him, and he always wanted me to be a lawyer, and he wanted me to be a federal judge. I got one out of the two. He was never involved in politics, didn't really encourage me to be involved in politics, but once I decided that's what I wanted to do, he supported me in that as well.
So can you go to law school thinking I'm just doing this to be a politician, or did you really just go to law school because you yourself wanted to be a lawyer?
I went to law school because I wanted to get the skills that you get as a lawyer,
Yeah.
not knowing what I would do with them. I
Is
knew
that
that I was
right?
going. I knew that I was going to practice law. I was positive. I also knew I was going to run for political office. I just didn't know when. So to me, they weren't mutually exclusive. And I knew that I would practice law before I ran for public office. I wanted to have that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I ended up being a law clerk myself on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and then I joined the law firm of Hahn Lozier before I ran for public office.
And in your time in public service, did you miss being a lawyer?
No, not that much.
Yeah.
I love being a lawyer. I want to make that clear. But I love public service so much that I didn't miss it. But you see, I was lucky because at some point in my career, I was elected to the job that is the perfect job for someone who loves the law and loves public policy and loves public service. There's only one job, an elected job in America at the statewide level that combines those two, and that's Attorney General. So in a sense, I was practicing law and I was in public service at the exact same time.
Tell us about your Judaism as you were growing up. What temple did you go to back then?
I was part of Suburban Temple. To this day, I'm a member of Suburban. I've been a member since I was a little boy.
Is that where you bar mitzvahed as well?
Not bar mitzvah. We didn't have bar mitzvah at that time. I was president of my confirmation class, and I was confirmed. Now there are bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, but when I was there were no bat mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. It was a Reformed temple that believed you did confirmation. Now, since that time, my children were bar mitzvahed and bat mitzvahed at Suburban Temple Kol Ami.
Yes.
So I did the Reformed Judaism version at Suburban Temple of bar mitzvah by being confirmed.
There's a word that I think covers everything you've done and that we're going to talk about and talked about so far, and that is Torah, as in teaching.
Yes.
Did you realize at some point that being a lawyer means you are, in fact, a teacher?
Yes, but I will say that the words tikkun olam resonate with me more than anything else. I feel more like I'm a repairer of the world than I am a teacher, meaning that my calling has always been teaching is a way to repair the world, but I'm focused on the end point, and that is trying to repair the patch of the world in which I live and work, no matter how small that is. My parents raised me to believe that you're on this earth to do things that go well beyond the people you love, the people you like, and the people you know. And that your calling is to help people you will never meet and that you will never know. And there are lots of ways to do that. And I just chose the path of law and public service, but there are countless other ways to do it too.
And the reality of it is, you'll never know how many people you helped, but you know you did.
I think that's true. I didn't always succeed, but I do believe that there are a number of things that I was able to do during my career, particularly public service, where I did help people that I will never meet and that I will never know. Yes.
And we have two law schools in this city. and you went to one different than the one you're working at now. How did we end up at Case Western?
It's ironic, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I will tell you that I love both law schools. I just happen to love Cleveland Marshall more. And I don't just say that because I'm the dean. I've fallen in love with my law school that I'm now. But I loved Case too. And I still have good friends from Case Law School. I actually believe that Cleveland is blessed to have two wonderful law schools that have more similarities than they have differences, but there are differences. Case is a higher ranked law school. But having said that, I will tell you that Cleveland Marshall, with all due respect to Case, is Cleveland's law school, meaning that there are far more Cleveland Marshall graduates like Peter Sackett than there are Case graduates. But I will say that in terms of the education I got at Case, phenomenal. And I think I can only say positive things about that law school.
What was your first entrance into political life after law school?
Well, actually, I sort of dabbled in political life my entire career, starting at 6th grade.
Right.
And here's what I mean by that. I went to Shaker High School and was on the student council and was vice president of the high school. Go to Oberlin, get elected to the student senate, end up being vice president of my senior year class. And during the time I was in law school, I was involved in campaigns. I helped Charlie Vanek win his congressional campaign against Francis Bolton and ended up working in his congressional office in D.C. And I know the tie between Charlie Vanek and this wonderful temple in terms of your historic role you've played in Soviet Jewry.
Yes.
And one of my first political mentors was Charlie Vanek and his chief of staff, Mark Talisman. And so I knew all about the Jackson-Vanek Amendment and Soviet Jewry as a result.
Yes.
So I worked at the Democratic National Committee for a little while. In the summer when I was in college, I worked for Senator Adlai Stevenson while I was in college. So I did lots of things involved in politics and government even while I was at Oberlin. Even formed an organization while I was at Oberlin called the Oberlin Political Caucus. I formed that with my best friend Ken Kay right after the Kent State shootings. That was a seminal day in my life, May 4th, 1970, when those students were killed. And some of the Oberlin students were focused on anti-war protests. I went to some of them, but that was not my thing. My thing was trying to elect women and men to the U.S. Congress who opposed the Vietnam War. To me, that's where I could make a bigger difference, and that was the focus of this organization that my friend Ken and I formed, called the Oberlin Political Caucus. So that's a long answer to an easy question, but I've really been involved in politics really since the 6th grade.
And you can't be involved with politics unless you're comfortable on your feet, thinking on your feet, reacting on your feet, and convincing on your feet.
One of the things that you learn as a lawyer, as you know,
Yes.
is to be able not just to advocate and persuade, but to try to understand the other person's viewpoint. It's why I believe that the legal education is the single greatest education you can get, because you learn to listen and to try to understand before you try to be understood. And that has stood me well in my life in terms of both public speaking and debating, because I believe that the best public speakers and the best debaters are the ones who know their audience, understand their audience, adapt their talk to whom they're speaking. And when you're debating or arguing a case, you should know the other side's case as well as you. And if you understand what that other person's thinking, you have a good chance of winning the argument. It's also the best way to negotiate. So I've spent my whole life, frankly, focused on written and oral persuasion and communication, and it's a natural part of both the law and government and politics.
When you were first in Columbus, who was the governor?
When I was first in politics, I was Jim Rhodes. I was elected to the Ohio legislature in 1980. And Jim Rhodes, of course, was a legend, a Republican governor. I got to know him actually pretty well during my time in the legislature, and got to know every governor since after that. And so I've worked actually with many governors, both Republican and Democrat. I was George Voinovich's lawyer, because at the time that George Voinovich was governor, I was Attorney General. And the Attorney General is the governor's lawyer, along other people's lawyer too, all the cabinet departments, all the state legislators. But so I've had the privilege of working with every Democratic and Republican governor in Ohio since 1980.
Of all those positions, Can you define which one was the most difficult to get your hands around?
In terms of the positions that I held, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I would say the job that was my favorite, it's not really answering your question,
It's okay.
but the job that was my favorite was Attorney General. It is a phenomenal experience. I can't even explain how phenomenal it is if you love the law and you love public policy and you love government and you love politics to be the chief legal counsel for the state of Ohio and the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Ohio. But I will tell you that I thought I knew how to be an executive. I thought I knew how to run things, and I didn't. In other words, I had been a state legislator for 10 years. Legislators don't run things. They're not executives. They're coalition builders. And so when I got elected Attorney General, I realized pretty quickly that I didn't know as much about managing a team and an office. The Attorney General's office is the largest law firm in the state of Ohio. It's larger than Jones Day or Squire Sanders in terms of the number of lawyers in the state.
Sure.
We had 1,200 lawyers, and we ran BCI, which is the Bureau of Criminal Identification, so we had law enforcement, and I realized very quickly that I had to learn how to run things. It wasn't enough to be a good public speaker. It wasn't enough to know public policy. It wasn't even enough to know the law. And so I would say the toughest time I ever had in public office was my first year as Attorney General, because as much as I loved it, I had to learn. Now, since that time, I've been a CEO and executive many times in many different ways, and I pride myself in now knowing how to run things. But I'm the first to admit I didn't know what I was getting into that first year, and I learned. And I learned from making mistakes in some cases.
Well, that gets to maybe the easier point to see when you're on the top of the triangle, is that coming from the legislative side did make you a better executive as well.
No question about that. No
Yeah.
question.
Yes.
Because what you learn in the legislature is that you can't get anything done, whether you're in the majority or the minority, without building coalitions. I'll give you a quick story to give you an example.
Okay.
For my 10 years in the legislature, 4 years I was in the majority party. I was a Democrat, and 4 years the Democrats were in the majority. 6 of those 10 years I was in the minority. To get a bill passed, if you're in the minority party, whether it's the U.S. Congress or whether it's the state legislature, is exceptionally hard. But there is a way to do it, and that is go across the aisle, not be overly partisan, and work your tail off to convince those in the other party to support your position. So, the very first bill that I ever introduced in the state legislature was the Child Safety Seat Restraint Law. At that time, very few states, in fact, I think maybe 1 or 2, had a law that said that if you had a child who was 4 years or younger or weighed less than 40 pounds,
Yep.
they had to be in a child safety seat.
4 and 40.
Now, these days, every state has it, but those days it didn't. And I was convinced that that would save lives. But there was significant opposition, particularly from downstate legislators, who opposed mandatory seatbelt laws, mandatory motorcycle helmet laws, anything mandatory. We're seeing it again today with mandatory vaccines, right? Mm-hmm. So I realized even though I thought it was motherhood and apple pie, it wasn't. And I spent a lot of time working with both Democrat and Republican rural legislators, convincing them that this would save lives, and that it was that a child in an accident at about 40 miles an hour was the equivalent of them falling from a 4-story building. And I had pediatricians all from throughout the state come with me in those meetings. Make a long story short, it was the first bill that I ever passed. And I passed it because I was able to get bipartisan support, and eventually was able to pass 10 laws during those 10 years. And every single time, it was because I was able to get bipartisan support. So the bottom line is that whether you're in the majority or the minority, you got to learn to build coalitions, and that's the skill I learned as a legislator.
And was 10 years just enough? It was time to go to Attorney General? Was there a different reason to change locations in Columbus?
I was in the House for 2 years. Then I ran for the Senate and was elected to the Senate, and I was in the Senate for 8 years. Mm-hmm. And as much as I loved it, I knew that the job that I always wanted to run for was Attorney General. But the person who was the Attorney General was one of my closest friends, Tony Celebrezzi, whose father was Mayor of Cleveland, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under John F. Kennedy, a legend. And so I couldn't run against my best friend. And one day in the late 1980s, my best friend, well, one of my best friends, Tony Celebrezzi, came to me and said, Lee, I'm going to run for governor, and you ought to run for attorney general. And I said, I'm going to. But I'd never run statewide. And that's like going from AAA to the majors overnight. And I was naive. I didn't realize how difficult it was. But Tony explained to me, you have to get in your car and you have to go to every county in the state of Ohio, the 88 counties in the state of Ohio.
Yes.
It's a big state.
Yes.
So bottom line, there were about 15 people who announced for attorney general on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. I was just one of 15. And I was definitely not the front runner. One of the people who was talking about running at the time was Joel Hyatt of Hyatt Legal Clinics, who had
yes.
much higher name recognition than I did.
Yes.
There were a couple of state senators who were very well known. Bottom line is that I knew there was only one way that I could get to the top of the heap, and that was to outwork everyone else. So even though I never missed a vote, anytime I could, I was out in my car traveling. And I traveled the state nonstop.
Wow.
And I think, honestly, it's not because I was any smarter than any of the other candidates. I outworked all them all. And most of them dropped out of the race by the time the filing deadline. I also raised more money than all of them did, and that helped too, because I realized I had to do two things: travel and ask for support and raise as much money as I could. And the money that I raised came primarily from the Cleveland Jewish community. My success in my career, in many ways, comes back to the Jewish community. I wouldn't have been successful, I don't believe, if the Jewish community in Cleveland hadn't supported me the way they did. And my friends in the Cleveland Jewish community called my friends in the Columbus Jewish community, the Cincinnati Jewish community. Now, you can't win a statewide race just on the support of the Jewish community, but having that base of support was immensely helpful to me. And so I will always be grateful to the Cleveland Jewish community for the support that they gave me all throughout my career, but especially when I ran for statewide office. They helped me, and I can't say enough for what they did. And when I say the Jewish community, I don't mean the formal Jewish community. I mean individual leaders
Sure.
and citizens of the Jewish community.
While you were in Columbus, did you have two households, one up here in Shaker and one in Columbus?
I did. I always did. But I never bought anything in Columbus. I only rented, and sometimes it was a hotel room, sometimes
Oh
it was
my gosh.
apartments. Sometimes I shared apartments with other legislators.
Yeah.
But I did that travel on I-71 for 10 years. I would go down to Columbus, usually on Monday, sometimes Tuesday morning. Was always in Columbus Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. Came back Friday. Interestingly, Peter, I never left my law firm. My law firm was very good to me. They allowed me to remain as of counsel. So I would practice law in the law office on Monday, go down to Columbus Monday night or Tuesday morning, be a legislator full-time Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, come back to Honloger, my law firm, on Friday, practice law. On the weekend, I did half law, half constituent service as a state legislator. So I spent about, I'd say, 60% of my time during those 10 years, no, more than that, I guess, maybe 75% of my time as a state legislator, 25% of my time as a lawyer. But because I worked nonstop, I still put in a lot of hours at the law firm.
And you still must have had you can't do all that unless you are incredibly driven.
I am driven.
And not just driven, but driven to public service.
I am a passionate person.
It is
And
amazing, Dean.
Everything that I do passionately. I'll say that.
I understand. Lots
Yeah.
of people are politicians and lots of people work hard. But your story, as you're describing it, is extraordinary.
Well, I don't know about extraordinary, but I will say to you that even to this day, I don't work any less hard than I did 40 years ago. I don't work any harder, but I don't work any less hard either. And it's just who I am. It's in my DNA. It's not that I don't want to have fun in life, and I do. I love spending time with my family. I love exercising. I love being with friends. But I am a driven person, and I believe that as I said earlier on, you're on this earth to make a difference for other people. And so every job I've ever had, that's why I took the job, and it's why I do this job today.
One of the best parts of being a lawyer is when you have the ability to understand that things aren't going exactly how you think they should go, and you're on your feet, and you've got to change what you're thinking and still convince a jury that your client is not guilty, or convince the jury, if you're a prosecutor, that the client is guilty. How easy was it for you, even at the beginning of your career, to think on your feet?
I wouldn't say it was easy, but it is a skill, I guess, that you acquire from practice.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of practicing. I probably have given well over 10,000 speeches in my life, ranging from speeches that were extemporaneous that lasted 1 minute to speeches that, you know, were 45 minutes in front of several thousand people. And when you do that your whole life, it just becomes more natural, you know. And so I'm not saying it was easy from the beginning. I remember when I was elected president of Fernway Elementary School, my only speech I had to give was lead the class in the Pledge of Allegiance. I was a nervous wreck, you know. But if you do this enough times, you get pretty good at it. And so I've been giving speeches literally probably even before 6th grade, because I forced my younger brothers and sisters to play school, and I was the teacher. So I've been giving speeches. I guess it's in my DNA. It's the best I can say. You know, I don't know.
Yeah. And have you tried to, in your time, explain to some people who don't get it that you really should try to serve the public? And have you been able to convince friends or associates or people you didn't know, we need your help? How do you do that?
I taught a course in the 1980s when I was a state legislator at the College of Jewish Studies called Jews and Politics. First time it had ever been done, and I taught it for many years. And I taught the reason why I think every Jew should be political. And I quoted from Bernard Malamud's The Fixer that there is no such thing as an apolitical Jew. You can't be one without the other. Because if you think about the history of our own people, we survived by being political. People define political as partisan politics or being a politician. There's politics in this temple. There's politics at my law school. There's politics in your family and my family. Politics to me is relationships, persuasion. And yes, formally I'm a politician, but we're all politicians. And so that's how I've approached politics my whole life. I think we don't think of ourselves as politicians, but we are. Every single one of us is trying to work relationships in our lives in a positive way, I'd like to think, to achieve a purpose, whatever that purpose may be. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think you have.
Okay.
Let's go back for a moment to one more step in the statewide level, and that is being the number 2 person in the entire state.
Yeah.
1 inch away from the governorship as a lieutenant governor.
Yes.
Was that something you yearned for?
No, you don't yearn to be lieutenant governor. No one ever. Let me explain one thing. In Ohio, it used to be that the governor and the lieutenant governor were elected separately. So in those days, for example, Jim Rhodes ran for governor, and Dick Celeste ran for lieutenant governor.
Oh my!
And so you had a Democratic lieutenant governor working with a Republican governor. It was dysfunctional. It made no sense. In fact, Dick Celeste tells the story that after he was elected lieutenant governor of Ohio, Jim Rhodes was elected governor. He went to see the governor and said, "Look, we're different parties, but what can I do for you?" And he said to Dick Celeste, "How's your golf game?" Because he said, "I'm not going to consult you at all. You're a different party." So here's what happened. In the late 80s, they changed the law, thank goodness, and they said that the governor and lieutenant governor must run together as a ticket, like president and vice president, right?
Sure.
So what happened is I wasn't thinking about running for lieutenant governor. At that time, I thought I was done with my political career. I was the president and CEO of a large nonprofit organization here in Cleveland called the Center for Families and Children. Mm-hmm. I'd been doing it for 7 years, and I loved it. One day, I get a call out of the blue from a guy named Ted Strickland, who had been a friend of mine over the years. He was a congressman from Southeast Ohio.
Yes.
And he said to me, "Could you meet me at the McDonald's restaurant in Rootstown, Ohio?" And I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to talk to you because I'm running for governor." And so I just thought he wanted to talk to me about how I could help him run for governor. And over the course of that meal, he said, "Hey, would you ever consider being my running mate and running for lieutenant governor?" And I said, "Ted, I'll be honest, I've thought about doing lots of things in my life. I've never thought about running for lieutenant governor or being a lieutenant governor running candidate. But by the end of the breakfast, I said to him, look, I would consider this, but I have a condition. I hope you don't mind me saying it. He said, no, what's your condition? I said, I don't want to wake up every morning wondering what you want me to do. I want a portfolio. So I said, here's the deal. If I run with you, can we have an understanding that after we're elected, that I won't just be the lieutenant governor, that you'll appoint me director of the Ohio Department of Economic Development. So I will be a director of a cabinet department and your lieutenant governor. He said, okay. So we won. And I was his first cabinet appointment. So he announced that my lieutenant governor is also going to be my director of economic development. So I had the best of both worlds. I was able to have the job that was focused on retaining and creating and attracting jobs in Ohio, but if he had a special project on education, any kind of thing, and he wanted my help, I was there. So I got to be able, it was a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Because every day I was focused on economic development and traveled to every city in the state, but if there was a major issue in the legislature, because I'd been in the legislature for 10 years, and he felt he wanted somebody to help in and sort of negotiate with the Speaker of the House and the minority leader, knew how to work, he'd say, Lee, would you mind just doing me a favor and tomorrow come with me and meet with the Speaker? We got this problem. So I was able to do special projects for him and work with him on special issues and still run the Department of Development. It turned out to be a phenomenal experience, and he and I were very close friends. That helped. If we had been at different parties, if we hadn't run together as a team, it wouldn't have been a great job, but it was a great job. And I remember interestingly, Peter, I had run for governor in 1998. So here it is, I've run for governor, I lost to Bob Taft, and now I'm lieutenant governor. And there's a press conference announcing me as lieutenant governor. The first question a reporter says to me, hey, you were attorney general, you ran for governor, how are you going to be able to deal with your own ego now that you're number two and you ran for governor? And I said, that's easy. I have been number two in my house. I've been lieutenant governor of the Fisher family my entire life. I'm used to being lieutenant governor. Peggy's own Fisher's the governor. And that put that issue to rest right away.
That took care of that.
That took care of that.
When you were lieutenant governor, was the House and the Senate also D, or were they R at that point?
Interesting, the House and the Senate were both Republican. That becomes very, very, now, by the way, it's part of our, for 2 years they were Democrat, 2 years they were Republican, so it went back and forth. But you learn coalition building skills. And by the way, sometimes even your own party, as you know, you see it today in the national level.
Yes.
Just because your own party's in power doesn't mean everything's going to be great, because you got different wings of your party. And so we were always negotiating, whether it was the Democrats in power or the Republicans' powers. You can't get a lot of things done unless you have the legislature, the House and the Senate with you. So we spent a lot of time working on legislative matters, but also an equal amount of time on executive matters. And for example, when I was Department of Economic Development, the thing I loved about it is I wasn't working with state legislators, I was working with mayors. And it wasn't partisan. I worked with as many Republican mayors as Democratic mayors, and not a single one of those mayors, Democrat or Republican, cared that I was a Democrat. All they cared is that they wanted to get jobs for their city. What made the job so wonderful.
So before we talk about the law school, certainly the picture in Columbus is redder than a golden delicious apple. It is as red as can be.
It's the reddest and the most conservative, most Republican it's ever been in my lifetime.
I mean,
That's right.
there hasn't been a Democratic state office holder since.
Well, Sherrod Brown is the only Democratic, he's the only state office holder. There are a few Democrats on the Ohio Supreme Court.
Yes.
But it's been a number of years. In fact, the last time there was a Democratic governor or lieutenant governor is when Ted Strickland and I were in office.
I didn't want to point at you, but you were it.
Yeah, that was it.
And,
Yeah.
and how long has it been?
Well, we were elected in 2006, and so we were in office from 2007 to 2010. So the answer is it's been 2010 since there's been a Democratic elected official other than Sherrod Brown, a U.S. Senator, and that's been 11 years.
And it sure doesn't seem like 2022 would be the time when we might see a change in any of that.
Well, listen, as a Democrat, I'm hopeful, but you're probably right in the sense that it's an uphill battle. What I mean by that is there's most people know in politics that if you have a Democrat in the White House, midterm, the Republicans do better.
Right.
If you have a Republican in the White House, midterm of that president, the Democrats do better. And that's almost always been the cycle. So now that we have a Democratic president, Republicans have an advantage in the congressional races and in statewide races as well.
Yes.
Does that mean Democrat can't win? Of course not. And I will give you an example. In the U.S. Senate race this year, Congressman Tim Ryan from
Yes.
Southeast Ohio is an exceptionally strong candidate, exceptionally strong. One of the reasons he's exceptionally strong is that that southeast area of the state that you go from Warren and Youngstown and Steubenville is known as Reagan Democrat country. In other words, they're Democrats, but they often switch parties. And they went for Reagan, they went for Clinton, they went for Obama, and they went for Trump. So in other words, they can go back and forth.
Yes.
So one of the reasons Ted Strickland and I won is that the two most important parts of the state to win when you're running statewide are Southeast Ohio, where Ted Strickland was from, and Cuyahoga County and Cleveland, where I was from. Now, Tim Ryan is the congressman for Southeast Ohio.
Wow.
If any Democrat can convince those Trump Democrats to move over to a Democrat for the U.S. Senate, it's Tim Ryan. So I think he's got a very good chance. But will it be uphill? Of course it will. He knows that.
Yeah.
And in the governor's race, it'll be uphill as well. But I've got a good friend, Nan Whaley, who is the mayor of Dayton, and she'll run an excellent campaign. But that will be a tight race as well. So the answer is yes, it's still a Republican state. And as a result, it's more difficult for Democrats to win than it was when I first was elected back in 1990, or even as recently as 2006 when I was elected lieutenant governor. But nothing's impossible.
So, you know, I think many people think Republicans love America, Democrats love America. We all should work together. But it seems like the current governor is going to have a primary fight from the aforementioned ex-president's group. Do you worry about that issue of DeWine, who's I think has done a very wonderful job?
Mm-hmm.
Do you wonder if Ohio would actually lose their current governor for the November race to somebody that doesn't act like Mike DeWine?
I think that all around the country, moderate Republicans are in danger
Yeah.
from the extreme right of their party. And they're less worried in many cases about a Democratic challenger in the general. They're more worried about the Republican.
You're right.
Now, I will say that in the case of Mike DeWine, I think it is highly unlikely that he will lose his Republican primary.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that he necessarily wins the general election against the Democrat. I'm not saying that. But I think in his case, I don't see any Republican on the right strong enough to defeat Governor DeWine. I know much more about Democratic politics than Republican politics, so don't consider me an expert, but I have watched Ohio politics my whole life, and I would say that it's unlikely.
So let me ask you a question that I asked Professor O'Neill, who was a constitutional law professor at Cleveland Marshall, who I have known ever since the Demyanya case with the city of Seven Hills, when I was working for that community, and he was with the ACLU.
Yes.
That goes back a long ways. I sent him an email. I don't want to call him Kevin. I call him Professor O'Neill.
Yes.
And I asked him, because in the work that I do for different municipalities, a question had come up about a certain flag that had a certain word before the current president. The word began with F, and then it had Biden.
Okay.
I asked him about whether that was a constitutional free speech issue. He said, of course. And he called me and we talked about it. I have believe that that flag is meant to incite, and only to incite anger and violence, and
Right.
is inappropriate. But I know with the U.S. Supreme Court, they're never going to take anybody's rights away from in their home having a freedom of speech.
All right.
For all the time you spent in public office, can you remember a time when that kind of flag would be posted against a sitting president of the United States?
The answer is there's been an ugly side of politics long before you and I were born. But I've never seen it as mean-spirited and as ugly at least in my lifetime, as it is right now. And Professor O'Neill, who, by the way, is a beloved professor at our law school,
Yes.
and one of the smartest people I've ever met, was right that it is a First Amendment, and someone has, and under our free speech amendment in the Constitution, and by the way, I carry the Constitution with me all the time, it's right here. He's right. People have the right to say stupid things. They have the right to say mean things. They have the right to say racist things. But I'll tell you a little story that involves Professor O'Neill and me. At the time, before I was dean and I was attorney general, Kevin O'Neill, as you mentioned, was the general counsel of the ACLU.
Yes.
And in the 1980s, I wrote a law that is law today, known as Ohio's hate crime law. And the law says that if you commit a crime against someone else because of the color of their skin or their religion or their ethnic origin, that's just not a crime against that person. That's not even a crime against a family or community. It's a crime against society and deserves stiffer punishment. So the law passed. 4 years later, I get elected attorney general, and guess what? The ACLU challenges that law that I had written as being unconstitutional because they said it was punishing hate speech.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I had the unique opportunity to argue a case before the Ohio Supreme Court defending the law that I had written earlier. And who was on the other side of that case?
Yeah.
Kevin O'Neill.
Wow.
Arguing that Lee Fisher's law was well intended, but it's punishing hate speech. And I argued, no, if you commit a crime against someone else and it is based upon hate and is evidence of hate, you're punishing the act. You're not punishing the speech. The speech is motivating the act, but it's the act you're. Make a long story short, I lost the case in the Ohio Supreme Court. It got appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. They reversed the Ohio Supreme Court, and we won. And to this day, Ohio's hate crime law is on the books and is constitutional, but it's always a thin line between hate speech and hate
Yes.
acts.
So speaking of hate speech, another thing that my wife and I saw about 3 weeks ago was not only was there an F Biden sticker on somebody's car, but the F and the B were assault rifles.
It's disgusting.
Yes.
It sickens my stomach.
Yes.
And yes, do they have the right to do it?
Yes.
Absolutely they do. And I would
Yeah.
defend that right. I wouldn't want to defend the right, but I
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
But I think that what's happened, and listen, there are extremes in both parties. I'm the first to admit that. But the extreme on the Republican Party has gone so far that it's no longer a Republican Party. It's basically a Fox News party. I can't tell you how many of my Republican friends say to me, I can't be a Democrat, but I'm no longer a Republican. This party left me. And I hear it every single day. So listen, right now, unfortunately, the extreme right of the party has taken over the party. But I think while they will win short-term victories, long-term, it's the death of the Republican Party if they don't if they don't stand up to those who I think are taking the party down the wrong road. And I think it's a wrong road for America, but it's even a wrong road for the Republican Party.
So let's change gears in the remaining time, try to cover a couple more issues. When you're in public service, not just at the beginning, but while you're trying to raise a family and in these different jobs, how do you convince people to protect your privacy and your right to have time with your family? How hard was that?
At times, very hard.
Yeah.
There were times when people would, not people, but a person in particular who would be angry at me, picketed our home in Shaker Heights. And because he stayed on the sidewalk, there's nothing the police could do. I got hate mail for most of my career because of my position for reasonable background checks on guns. My picture was up in gun shops for years as wanted #1, Lee Fisher, because he wants to take away our guns. And of course, I did not want to take away guns. I just wanted to have background checks to make it more difficult for the bad guys to get guns and law-abiding citizens to own them. But my point is this, that I think that I had one experience in my life that helped center me. And it's when I lost my reelection for Attorney General. And let me explain. I had never lost an election in my life until 1994. From Billy Riley, president of Fernald Elementary School, all the way through the state legislature, Attorney General. And it was an awful year for Democrats. And Democrats all over the country lost. And I won't get into a lot of the details about why I lost that election, but it was an extremely close race. All the other races, Democrats lost by large margins, but I lost just by a little. But it didn't matter, I lost. And my daughter at the time was about 6 years old, and she's crying hysterically. And I say, honey, it's all right. And then she said, but this means you won't be my daddy anymore. And that is a moment I will never forget the rest of my life. Because she thought being Attorney General and being her daddy were the same thing. And it made me realize that I was maybe too caught up in my own identity as an elected public official. And that I'm her father. That's my job, not being Attorney General. And I tell that story to this day to say that you've got to be careful never to let your career or your job become who you are. It is something that you're doing that has a purpose, but who you are is the father and the son and the brother, and that I've never forgotten. And so I've always tried to achieve that balance between being a father and a husband and not let those other things interfere. Have I always been successful? No, I'm a flawed human being like we all are. But that was a moment in my life I'll never forget. Does this mean you won't be my daddy anymore?
And the reality of it is behind every good man is a wonderful woman.
No, you're wrong.
Oh.
Not behind. Never behind.
In front of.
Not, well, either in front
Next
of or
door.
next to. I would argue
yeah.
sometimes in front of, but most of the time just next to.
Yeah.
And I know that's what you meant.
Yes.
But the reason I correct you so quickly is that I do think that we were raised to think that. And it's a common thing to say, but the truth of the matter is that the best marriages, and you know this, Peter, and we all
Yes.
know this, is that when spouses are equal partners. And my wife, of course, has had her own career her whole life. She owned a travel agency for many years, but for the last 15 years, she's been the president and CEO of the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio, the largest diversity education and training organization in the state.
Wow.
But when I ran for office, even though she had a full-time job, even though she was a full-time mother as well to our 2 children, she was enormously helpful to me. So helpful that I'm being dead serious. Many people believe today that if she had been the candidate, she would have won for governor, and that I should have not run. And that's probably true, because she's more extroverted than I am. So the answer is yes. Next to every man and next to every woman, if they can be partners, they can be great successes.
So you make a jump from working in Columbus and statewide office. How did it come about, where somebody said, how about our law school in Cleveland? We need some help here. How did that happen?
I've lived my life at the intersection of the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. I've met people who spend their entire life in one job, and they do it well, and I don't look down at that, but that's not me. I like different experiences. I like to live my life in chapters. So it's why I've spent 18 years in public life, but I also spent almost as many years in the nonprofit world, running 2 nonprofit organizations, the Center for Families and Children and a national organization called CEOs for Cities. And I knew that there was one thing I still hadn't done. Even though I had guest lectured in schools ranging from elementary school to law school my whole life, I really had never been in academia. And I thought that what's the single thing that I could do now as the final chapter of my career, probably the final chapter, although I'm not sure, but at least one of the last chapters anyway. And I said, the most important thing I could do would be part of helping train and teach a new generation of leaders. And the best way to do that is in higher education. And so if you take higher education, you combine it with my background in law and public policy, what better job in America than to try to be the dean of a law school? And so I got a call one day that the dean of Cleveland Marshall was leaving to become the dean of Syracuse Law School, and they were looking for a new dean. Well, I felt my chances of getting that job were probably close to zero. Why? Because 95% of the law deans in America have been law professors for 10, 15, 20 years.
At their institution.
At their institutions or even another institution,
Okay.
not necessarily, but a law professor. In
Yeah.
other words, it's difficult for someone who's not been in academia to become a dean. So I knew it was going to be uphill, but I figured, why not try? My whole life I've gone against the odds. Sometimes I've won, sometimes I have lost, but it's never dissuaded me. So I put my hand in the ring to be the interim dean because they didn't want to decide right away who the dean would be. And to make a long story short, I was blessed with the fact that the faculty was willing to give me a chance because I had had a different kind of career and that I'd run things. And you know, being the dean is being the CEO. You're the CEO of the law school. Yes, I'm a professor, and yes, I do teaching, but your main job is not to write law review articles. Your main job is not to teach classes. Your main job is to run that law school and to make sure it's run extremely well for the benefit of the students and also to be financially sustainable. And that's what I've been doing as an attorney general, as a lieutenant governor, Center for Families and Children, CEOs for Cities. Make a long story short, I got there in June of 2016. The halls were quiet because most faculty's on 9-month contracts. Most of the students are not in summer. So I'm working with the staff, but I'm beginning to think, well, did I make the right decision? And all of a sudden, August comes around, and the students start coming to the building. Didn't take too long to figure out this is exactly what I wanted to do. So at that point, I
right?
decided to compete to be the full-time dean. But that was a very competitive process where a lot of extremely, extremely bright, capable people, all of whom were law professors, either at my law school or at other law schools, competed. But I was fortunate enough to be selected by our faculty and the president of Cleveland State University to be the dean, and now I've been doing it for 4 years, and I love it because I feel, first of all, on a personal level, I've found the fountain of youth. It's called students.
Students.
To be around students every day, they're intellectually curious, they've got energy, and it gives me the energy. But I'm also around faculty who devoted their lives, like a Kevin O'Neill, to teaching. And I so admire what they do and how well they do it, that I can tell you that I have just loved this chapter of my life and have no
Wonderful.
intentions of, I don't even think about retirement. So at this point, I've been doing it for 5 years, if you include the year I was interim. And I don't have any plans to do anything else. I don't know how long I'll be there. I'd like to be there as long as I'm doing an excellent job. But in some cases, that's not my decision. We'll see what happens.
Marshall is, how many students would there be in the current class?
In our first year class for the last 4 years, it's been 140 students each year. What's interesting is that law school enrollment, Peter, went down dramatically starting in about 2011. I'll give you an example. In the year 2000, our first year class was about 300 students.
I think that made
Okay.
him, I mean, my maid.
So I wouldn't be surprised when
Yeah.
you were there were 300 students, okay? And that was true, 21 years ago. By the time we got to 2011, there were about 175.
Wow.
In the middle of my predecessor's term, Craig Boyce, it went down to about 140. But get this, when I arrived in 2016, you'll never guess what the size of the class was. We were projecting a first-year class of 85 students.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, was that unusual? Actually, no. Except for the top 30 ranked schools like Harvard and Yale, law school enrollment went down because of technology and other reasons. The legal market started to shrink. Less students were interested in going to law schools. They didn't think they could get a legal job. And so all law schools were shrinking. And they were running deficits. They'd gone from cash cows, giving money to their university, to deficits. So I came in at a pretty challenging time. And my challenge was to get us back up to about 120, which we felt was the right size. Well, the good news is we got a little higher. And now we've been 140 for the last 4 years. That's probably the right size for the size of our legal market and And now we're very steady. We now are no longer have a deficit. We're running a surplus, and we're in good financial shape. And there are about 450 total students in the building, if you count first year, second year, third year, and fourth year students who are part-time students. We call them 4LE, fourth year evening. And as a result, 450 students, 30 faculty, 30 staff,
Wow.
and thousands of alumni like you.
So lots of people don't become lawyers. Lots of people don't aspire to become a lawyer. But there are students out there, maybe a few of which I know are watching this evening, a few I know who are still in high school. Tell them what a legal education can do for somebody.
I believe that a legal education is a leader education. It doesn't just teach you to be a lawyer, it teaches you to be a leader. So if you get that JD degree and you decide you don't want to practice law a day in your life, you didn't waste a second, because you've learned skills that other people don't have. You've learned how to advocate, you've learned how to persuade, you've learned how to understand what the other person's thinking, not just what you're thinking. You've learned to be able to solve problems and to negotiate and to find a solution. You've learned how to look at a problem not from one angle or two angles, but 3 or 4 different angles, all different angles. There's no graduate degree that gives you that blend of skills. So I tell students, even if they're not sure they want to practice law, they still should go to law school. And if you think about the history of the world, but let's just focus on the history of our country. What was the profession that was held by the majority of people who wrote this book,
Mr.
the
Madison.
Declaration of Independence,
Mr. Madison.
the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah.
With all due respect, they weren't engineers, they weren't doctors, they weren't dentists, they weren't MBAs. The people who founded this country were lawyers.
And farmers.
And farmers, no question. But the profession that was most
Yeah.
dominant was lawyers.
Yeah.
There are, of all the professions in America, there have been more lawyers who were president of the United States than any. There have been, of all the professions in America, there have been lawyers who have been cabinet secretaries to presidents in America. My point being that you're not automatically a lawyer, but there's a history in our country that lawyers are there not just to practice law, but to lead. So if you want to be a leader and you want to make a difference in your community, whether you practice law or not, you want to go to law school. And the reason you want to go to Cleveland Marshall Law School, where we're about to celebrate our 125th anniversary next year, is that it's an iconic law school that has produced the greatest leaders this state has ever seen. We've produced governors, we've produced mayors. Frank Jackson was mayor. Marcia Fudge, who just was selected by President Biden as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
Yes.
But let's go back in history. Carl Stokes, first African-American mayor of a major city, graduate of Cleveland Marshall. Lou Stokes, first African-American congressman in the state of Ohio. The list goes on and on
Yes.
and on. Women and men who've made marks that are just truly remarkable and who were graduates of our law school. And we're a law school of excellence and opportunity. Affordable tuition. A lot of our students don't go right from college to law school. They have life experience, they have grit, they have maturity. So apologize for engaging in a commercial, but I'm a passionate about the value of a legal education, and I'm passionate about Cleveland Marshall Law School at Cleveland State University.
You know, you just used the magic word. I don't think you intended to, but you just did. If there's one word that flows in almost everything you say, it's passion. And it's the same way, you know, you can go to a dental convention and the dentists, they have passion for what they do.
Yes.
Everybody who does something that they're really happy about, that's in their blood, that they can't avoid, that is always on the tip of their tongue, that they can't wait to get up in the morning and do, that's passion. And
Yes.
that has apparently, very evidently, has defined your public life.
It has defined my life.
Yes.
It's in my DNA, and
Yes.
I've been lucky enough, Peter.
Well, I don't think it's just luck, Dean. It's a lot more than luck. It's hard work, and extraordinary work. Hard work. I don't mean to cut you off, and I'm sorry
No,
if I did.
I understand.
But you're sitting up here talking about a lifelong career that is not too many people can speak about. And what the one word that we didn't yet say, and that you carry with yourself, is integrity.
Well, thank you for that.
We all know that when you can walk into a room and everybody knows there's Lee Fisher, there's an honest guy, there's a guy when he says the light was green, when he said the light is red, when he walks in the room, you're going to get the truthful answer. That's important to public leadership, is it not?
Well, it's actually true. It's important to life.
To
because,
life.
You know, the most important thing all of us have
Yes.
is our reputation
And our word.
and our word.
Absolutely.
And you know, listen, it's unfortunate, but those in public life get a bad rap because there are bad apples. And therefore, an entire profession gets a bad reputation, when the truth is that the vast majority of women and men with whom I've worked in the law and in public service are good, honorable people.
Yes.
But because it's a public profession,
It sure is.
law is a public profession, and public service and elective office is a public profession, a spotlight goes on those who fail and are flawed and don't have integrity. And then people, unfortunately, but understandably, paint a broad brush and say, well, they're all like that. Nothing could be further from the truth. But you have to work 3 times as hard to convince people of that, so that's what I've always tried to do, work 3 times as hard to convince people that no, you have to give every bit of the benefit of the doubt, but you have to work twice as hard if you're a lawyer or you're in public life, and show, no, there are honest people who are there to do it, to help people, and to do it for the right reasons.
And you're one of them, my friend.
Well, and you are too, Peter.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I hope everybody has enjoyed this year. This has been extraordinary for me to spend time with you in center stage at Beth Israel.
It's an honor for me too, so thank you.
To be here and to talk about your amazing career. And we thank you very much for being here. We wish you the best of this holiday season, and may 2022 be a wonderful year for you and your family and the law school you work with.
And same to you and your family and to this great congregation.
Thank you very much.